I kept the book at Harrow Ridge for 9 years. That was my job and my whole rank, and I was good at it. Every round fired on that range went into my ledger. The shooter, the lot number, the distance, the score, the wind call, the miss. Green columns, black ink, no smudges. A man who cannot shoot can still be exact, and I was exact. I write this down now because I am the only one who wrote anything down that morning, and because a ledger is a kind of confession if you keep it long enough. Mine says what 31 recruits saw and what 40 of us laughed at, and it says what she did afterward in a hand that shakes on the page, because I was shaking when I wrote it and I did not go back and copy it clean. I have thought about copying it clean. I never have. Harrow Ridge sits on a shale table above a dry valley, and the wind comes up that valley in the late morning like it has business with you. It does not blow. It works. It comes in 3 layers and they do not agree with each other. A low push off the shale that carries grit, a middle stream that swings without warning, and a high cold river of it that sits over the whole thing and pretends not to be there, until your round is halfway out and then leans on it. Every man who came to shoot at Harrow believed he understood wind until he stood on our line. Then he learned that he understood a breeze. The distance markers ran out to 1,200 yards. The far berm sat in a bowl where the 3 winds met and made a 4th one, and that 4th wind had no rules I ever found written anywhere. Kadri used to say the range was haunted. That was a joke mostly. Men say things like that when a place beats them, and they need a word for it that is not their own name. The butts were old concrete, patched, half-sunk. The line was a long shelf of packed grit with sandbag berms, and behind it the tower, and behind the tower a shed of scopes and spotting glasses and broken tripods and cleaning rods and 40 years of brass in buckets. That shed was where I kept the ledger. I had a table in it and a chair with one short leg and a window that faced the line, and through that window I watched 9 years of men fail. 2 weeks before the morning I am telling you about, they sent us a rotation of recruits, 31 of them, tail end of a marksmanship pipeline, sent to Harrow because Harrow was supposed to humble them before they went on to the schools that would break them for real. That was the theory. Master Sergeant Doyle Ballard ran the line. He was 51, built like a foundation, and he had run marksmanship at 3 commands and had opinions about all of them. He had been at Harrow 4 years. He had a range record he was proud of. He had a voice that carried the length of the line without a speaker, and he liked to use it. And in the shed, most mornings, working at the bench in the corner with a jeweler's screwdriver and a coffee she never drank hot, there was a woman. She had been on the ridge, I think, 6 or 7 weeks by then. She wore plain coveralls, the gray ones, no rank on them, no name tape, no patch, nothing. She had a bad weather jacket she never buttoned. Her hair was gray at the temples and she kept it back and she did not talk. Not to me, not to Ballard, not to the recruits. She came in before first light, she worked, she went. She fixed things. That was how I understood her. She fixed things. Spotting scopes came in with fogged glass and went out clear. Tripods came in with stripped legs and went out tight. A range flag that had spun crooked for 2 years came off the pole one Tuesday and went back up straight, and I had not asked her to do it and neither had anyone else, and when I looked she was already back at the bench with the screwdriver. Somebody sometime had called her the range cleaner. I do not know who. It might have been me. It might have been a corporal who did not know better and it stuck because nobody who did know better ever bothered to correct it. She swept the shed. She emptied the brass buckets. She wiped the tower glass. She did those things because they needed doing and nobody else did them, and we decided that meant they were what she was. I want to be honest about this. That is the whole of it. Nobody handed her a broom and told her she was the help. We just watched a woman clean up after us and let the conclusion do itself. I never asked her name. 9 years I kept the most careful book on that ridge, and there was a woman in my shed for weeks and I never once wrote her down. She had hands that were wrong for a cleaner. I noticed and did nothing with it. There was a groove on the top of her right index finger, an old flat callus with a shine on it, and the pad of her left thumb had a mark that a person gets one way and one way only, from years of running it up a knurled elevation dial. Her hands were steady the way a surgeon's are steady, not stiff, not careful, just quiet, like they had run out of reasons to move without cause. Once that first week, I saw her lift a broken spotting scope off the bench, hold it up, and look through the tube at the far berm with no glass in it at all. Just the empty tube. She held it maybe 4 seconds. Then she set it down, walked to the shed door, stood in the doorway with her chin lifted, and watched the range flags for what must have been 2 full minutes. Then she came back and started cutting a new spacer for the mount. I put that in the ledger as a joke. I wrote, 714 cleaner checks the wind, and I laughed at my own line and turned the page. That is what I mean by exact. I recorded it, I just did not read it. The morning I am telling you about began with a formation, and it began badly. And it began badly because Master Sergeant Ballard had spent 13 days watching 31 recruits fail to hit anything past 800 yards, and a man like Ballard does not carry that well. The recruits were bad. That is the plain truth, and it is not entirely their fault. They came from a pipeline that taught them to shoot on flat green ranges with a single flag and a printed dope card, and Harrow Ridge is not that. Harrow eats a printed dope card. On day 1 they shot 400 and did fine. On day 4 they went to 800 and their groups opened up like a hand. On day 9 they went to 1100 and the entire line, 31 shooters, 5 rounds each, 155 rounds, put 4 rounds on paper. 4. I wrote them down. I wrote down each one because they were the only ones I had to write. By day 13, the cadre had started shooting to prove a point. This is a thing that happens on a range that is winning. The instructors get on the line to show the recruits how it is done, and they do it in front of everyone, and Harrow Ridge does not care who you are. Ballard shot on day 13, 1100 yards. He was, I will say this, a fine shooter. He had a beautiful position. He was patient. He read the low flag and the mid flag, and he waited for the lull, and he sent it. And the round went 2 feet right of the plate and low, and he did not say anything. And he cycled and sent another, and it went 1.5 feet right and high. And the wind had changed by then, and it had changed again by the third. And he shot 5 and hit nothing and got up and dusted his front and said, "That's the ridge for you," in a voice that was aiming for Rye and did not get there. His range record, the one he was proud of, was a 900-yard plate from 4 years back. It was on the board in the tower. It had been on the board for 4 years because nobody had beaten it, and by the middle of that second week, the recruits had started to look at that board like it was a wall rather than a target. So on the morning of the 14th day, Ballard was carrying 13 days of a range beating him in front of children, and he needed to be large. He formed them up on the shelf behind the firing line at 6:40. Cold morning, the good kind, before the valley woke up and started pushing. The flags were limp. In an hour they would not be. I was in the shed doorway with my ledger under my arm and my pen already out, because the first relay was in 20 minutes and I wanted the header written. And she was in the shed behind me at the bench, working on a spotting scope with a bent focus ring. I remember the sound of it, that small dry click of a screwdriver finding a slot. It went on the whole time. It never sped up and it never stopped. Ballard was talking to them about respect. That was his subject. He had a way of talking about respect that made it clear he was owed it and had not been paid. He told them a range does not care about your feelings. He told them a rifle does not care that you are tired. He told them the wind does not care that it is not fair, all of which is true and none of which teaches anybody to shoot. And then he looked past them, through the shed door, at the woman at the bench. I saw him see her. I saw the idea land on him. It landed the way an idea lands on a tired man who needs a small win, and I knew what he was going to do about 2 seconds before he did it, and I did not say anything, and I have had a long time to think about those 2 seconds. "Hold on," he said to the recruits. He raised his voice not much, just enough to carry into the shed. "Ma'am, come out here a minute." The clicking stopped. She came out. She did not hurry and she did not dawdle. She had the screwdriver still in her right hand, and she was wiping her left on a rag as she came, and she stopped about 6 feet from the end of the formation, and she stood there. She stood, I noticed later, exactly the way a person stands who has been told to stand somewhere many thousands of times, feet apart, hands going to rest at the small of her back with the rag folded into them, chin level, not at attention, just placed, like furniture that had decided where it went. "Recruits," Ballard said. "This is the lady who cleans up this range." Somebody in the second rank made a sound, not a laugh, the sound before a laugh, the one that asks permission. Ballard gave it. He smiled. He was not, I want to be clear, a cruel man in the way that word usually means. He was a tired man in front of an audience, which is a different thing and can be worse. 14 days, he said, and not one of you has managed to embarrass this range, so. He gestured at her, a little open-handed flourish presenting her. Ask her rank. Nobody moved. Go on, he said. Ask her. Somebody ask her rank. And a recruit did. His name was Private Deo. He was 19. He was the smallest man in the formation, and he wanted very badly not to be, and he half turned and he said, in a voice pitched to be heard, "What's your rank, ma'am?" And the line laughed. I need to tell you what that laugh sounded like, because I have heard it many times since in my own head and I have not been able to get it out. It was not a big laugh. 31 young men in the cold, laughing at a joke that had been handed to them by a man they were afraid of. It was relieved. That is the word. They laughed like men putting down a weight. 13 days of Harrow Ridge taking their skin off, and here was somebody it was safe to be better than. And I laughed. I want that on the page in my own hand. I was standing in the shed doorway with my ledger under my arm and I laughed. It came up out of me easy, and it was not even a decision. I had watched that woman fix my scopes for 6 weeks, and I laughed at her because a master sergeant told a boy to ask her a question. She did not answer. She looked at Private Deo for about 2 seconds. Not hard. She just looked at him, the way you look at a road sign. And then she looked at Ballard, and she looked at him a little longer, and there was nothing on her face at all, no anger, no hurt, nothing you could take hold of, and then she looked away, out at the range, at the flags which were beginning to lift. That was all. She looked at the flags. And the laugh, which had been going, sort of thinned out and fell over, because a laugh needs something to land on, and there was nothing there. Ballard did not like that. I watched him not like it. "All right," he said. "Fun's over. First relay, get your gear." He was not done. Men like Ballard are never done in the moment. They are done about 4 minutes later, and it comes out sideways. The first relay went to the line. I set up in the tower with the ledger and the big glass, and the recruits shot at 1100 and the valley woke up while they were doing it, and it went the way it had gone for 13 days. The low flag would sit and the mid flag would swing, and a boy would send his round into the shale a body length right of the plate, and I would write him in the column and go to the next. And she went down the line behind them with a bucket. That was her routine. When a relay finished, she walked the line and picked up the brass, and she did it without being asked, and it needed doing because 2,000 rounds of brass on a firing line is a hazard and nobody else was going to bend down for it. Ballard watched her do it, and then he stopped the second relay before they went down, and he called out, loud in front of everyone, and he pointed at her with 2 fingers. "Recruits, hand your brass to the lady. That's what she's for." I wrote it in the ledger. I did not write it as a quote. I wrote 813, MSGTB instructs Relay 2 to hand brass to Civ. Cleaner, which is a coward's way of writing something down, and I knew it while I was doing it, and I did it anyway. I have thought about that sentence more than I have thought about most sentences in my life. They did it. Of course they did it. 31 young men who had spent 13 days being made small, and here was a thing they could hand down. They came off the line and they held their brass out, and she took it in the bucket, and one of them, I do not know which, and I have wanted to know for years, and I am glad I do not. One of them held his out and then dropped it before her hand got there, dropped it in the grit at her boots and said, "Sorry, ma'am." And she crouched and picked it up out of the dirt, one case at a time, 6 cases, and put them in the bucket and stood, and went on to the next man. She did not look at the one who dropped it, not once. I was in the tower with a spotting glass on my eye, and I watched a woman pick brass out of the dirt in front of 31 laughing men, and I did not come down from the tower. That is what I have. That is my whole account of myself that morning. I did not come down from the tower. Here is the thing about the wind on Harrow Ridge, and I am going to explain it properly, because unless you understand it, you cannot understand what happened at 1100 yards at 10:41 that morning, and you will think it was a trick or a story or luck. It was none of those. It was the most methodical thing I have ever watched a human being do. The valley below the ridge runs roughly northwest to southeast, and it is not a straight valley. It has a bend in it about 4 kilometers out, and it has a shoulder of higher ground on the northern side that comes to a point. The morning sun heats the eastern face of that shoulder before it heats anything else. The air there rises, and other air comes to fill it, and it comes from the valley floor, and it comes up the draw, and it arrives at our firing line at about 800 yards downrange, which is exactly where it does the most harm. That is layer 1. Low, dirty, full of grit, and it pushes left to right across the range from roughly 900 to 1130 and then dies. Layer 2 is the valley wind proper, and it comes from the southeast, and it does not care about the sun at all. It cares about the pressure difference between the valley and the plain 40 kilometers away, and it swings. And when it swings hard, and it swings without any warning at all on the ground. The flags do not tell you it is coming. The flags tell you it has arrived, which is too late for a bullet that is already in the air. Layer 3 sits above both of them, a cold, high river of air off the north table, and it is the one nobody believes in because you cannot see anything move. It does not touch the flags. It does not touch the grass. It only touches the top of the bullet's arc, at about 600 or 700 yards, where the round is highest and slowest and stupidest, and it leans on it there. And by the time the round comes back down into the layers you can actually see, it is already 40 inches off, and there is nothing to be done about it. Now, at 1100 yards on Harrow Ridge, at mid-morning in the bowl where the berms sit, all 3 of those layers meet and shear against each other. Where they shear, they roll. It is a rolling column of air about 80 meters wide that stands more or less in one place and turns over. And it is invisible, and it is not the same speed at the top as at the bottom, and it does not care what your flags say, and it does not care what your dope card says, and it does not care that you have 130 confirmed hits at 1,000 yards on a range in Georgia. I did not know any of that on the morning of the 14th day. Nobody on that ridge knew it. It had never been written down anywhere I had ever read. What we knew was, past 1,000 yards at mid-morning, Harrow Ridge cannot be shot. Ballard had a phrase for it, the ridge closes at 10. And he was proud of that phrase, and it excused everything, and it was, I understand now, the single most expensive sentence ever spoken on that range. Because it was not true. It had just never been unsaid by anyone who was in a position to unsay it. The thing that broke it open was the wind book. There had been a man on that range, years before my time, named Chief Warrant Officer Oral Sarn. I knew the name the way you know the name on a plaque. He had been the range's shooting instructor, and he had died on the line an aneurysm, at his own bench on a Thursday at 58, which is a stupid way for a man like that to go, and there is no story in it and no lesson. He had a folding stool that was still in the shed. He had a name burned into a tool rack. That was Sarn. And he had a notebook. It was in the shed in the back in a footlocker under a stack of range flags that had faded to white, and I had seen it maybe 4 times in 9 years and never once opened it. It was a green field notebook, water-swollen, warped into a shape like a wave, and the cover had rings on it from a cup. I thought it was a duty log. I never checked. That is what I did with things at Harrow. I logged them and I did not check them. She had it. I do not know when she found it. I do not know how long she had been reading it. What I know is that between the second and third relay, when the recruits were on the shelf drinking water and Ballard was in the tower with the range officer looking at the score sheets and shaking his head, I came down to the shed for a fresh pen, and she was at her bench, and the warped green notebook was open in front of her, and she had a second notebook, a plain new one, hers open beside it, and she was copying. Not copying the words. She was copying and then changing. I could see her writing, checking, crossing out, writing again. There were columns. There was a sketch in her hand of the valley from above, with the bend in it and the shoulder marked and arrows on it that curled. She had a scrap of range flag material, a strip of the orange cloth, cut, maybe 4 inches, pinned to the bench with a screwdriver. And there was a page of Sarn's book open under her left hand, and on it, in a dead man's handwriting, faded and blotted where the water had got at it, I could read exactly one line before she moved her hand. It said, "The flags lie after 9:30. Watch the dust on the shoulder." And I said something. I said, "What are you doing?" She did not look up. It was the first thing anybody had said directly to her all morning that was not a joke, and she did not look up. She said he knew. Her voice was low and it had a rasp in it, and it was the first time in 6 weeks I had heard it. She said it like a man says a name at a grave. Then she said, he knew, and he wrote it down and nobody read it. And she turned a page. I stood there with a pen in my hand for a moment, and then I went back up to the tower, because the third relay was coming down, and because I did not have any idea what to do with what I had just seen, and it was easier to go and write things in a column. The third relay was where it broke. They put 12 shooters on the line at 1,100 yards, 60 rounds. Ballard had decided, and you could see him deciding it, you could see it come over him, that he was going to demonstrate. That was his word. He was going to demonstrate the shot from the number 1 position in front of 31 recruits and the range officer, and put a round on that 1,100-yard plate and show them that the ridge could be beaten by a man who did not make excuses. He built a beautiful position. I have never seen a better one. Bipod, rear bag, elbows in, cheek weld, everything. He read the flags. Low flag half value left, mid flag full, far flag lazy. He dialed it. He waited. He waited a good long time, and he waited well. You could see him waiting for the lull the way a patient man waits, and he sent it. And through the glass, I watched the round throw grit 2.5 feet right of the plate and low, and the smack of it came back to us a 1.5 seconds later. He did not say anything. He cycled. He came off 2 mils. He sent it. Grit high and right, less far but still right. Third round. He had gone too far and it went left, because the mid-layer had swung while he was in his trigger press, and there was no way on God's earth for him to know it. And the round went left. And Harrow Ridge did to Master Sergeant Doyle Ballard what Harrow Ridge did to everybody. Fourth round, fifth, nothing, nothing. And he got up. He got up off that line in front of 31 recruits, and he dusted his front, and his voice was not wry this time. It was flat and it was loud. "The ridge closes at 10, he said. "Nobody shoots this at 1100 at 10 in the morning. Nobody. Not me, not you, not anybody who ever stood on this line. That's not a failure. That's physics." And there was a silence on the shelf. 31 young men very carefully not saying anything. And into that silence from the shed doorway, a woman's voice said, "Sarn did." Everything stopped. I have been trying for a long time to describe what that was like, and the closest I can get is this. It was like a wire pulled tight. Nobody moved. Ballard turned around very slowly, the way a big man turns when he has been touched from behind. She was standing in the shed doorway. She had the green notebook in her left hand, closed, one finger holding a page. She had the plain coveralls on and no rank on them, and the rag still folded into her back pocket. "What did you say?" Ballard said. "Chief Warrant Officer Sarn shot this range at 1100 at 10:30 in the morning," she said. "Regularly. He wrote it down. It's in the shed." Ballard looked at the notebook in her hand, and something moved on his face that I did not read correctly at the time. I thought it was anger. It was not, or not only. It was the look of a man who has just realized that a thing he has been standing on has a floor under it he never checked. "That range record on your board," she said. 900 yards. Sarn's book has him confirming a 1200-yard plate the year he died. 6 of them. He has the conditions written for every one. "That book," Ballard said, "is a dead man's notebook and you're a—" He stopped. "I want to give him that." He stopped. He heard the shape of the sentence that was coming out of his own mouth, and he stopped it in his teeth, and 31 recruits watched him stop it. The range officer came down out of the tower. Lieutenant Commander Issa Prout. Range officers on that ridge were administrative more than anything, and Prout was a careful officer who had been on Harrow 8 months and had never once shot on it. He came down the tower steps quickly and he said, "What's the problem here?" Ballard said, "No problem, sir. Civilians on my firing line." And Prout looked at her, really looked at her, for what I am fairly sure was the first time, and he said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to clear the line." And she said, "No." Just that, no. Not raised, not hard. She said it the way you say a fact. "Excuse me," Prout said. I said, "No, sir." She stepped out of the doorway and down onto the shelf. "You have 31 shooters who have been told for 2 weeks that this range cannot be shot at 1100 yards in the morning. That is false. They are going to leave here believing a false thing about wind and about their own hands, and some of them are going to need to be right about wind later in a place where it costs more than a score sheet. So no, sir, I'm not clearing the line." Prout's mouth opened. "I'd like to shoot," she said. "1 string, number 4 position, and then I'll go." Here is what Ballard did, and I have never decided what to make of it. He laughed. It was a short, ugly, disbelieving laugh, and he turned to the recruits, and he threw a hand at her and he said, "You want to shoot?" "Yes." "With what?" "With his," she said, and pointed at the rifle Ballard had just failed with. It was still lying on the sandbag in the number 1 position, bolt back, bipod out. And Ballard, and I think it was the recruits that did it. I think if the 2 of them had been alone he would have walked away, Ballard said, loud enough for the whole shelf. "You know what, Lieutenant Commander? Let her." Prout said, "Master Sergeant." "Let her," Ballard said. 2 weeks these men have watched a range beat them. Let 'em watch what a range actually is. He turned around. He was talking to the recruits now, not to her. "Watch this. Every one of you, watch this. This is what it looks like when somebody who's never been on a line thinks a notebook is the same thing as a rifle." And to her, over his shoulder, in the exact same voice he had used at 6:40. "Go ahead, ma'am, take your time." She was already walking to the line. I came down out of the tower. I want the record to show that. 9 years, and I finally came down out of the tower, and I came down because I did not want to watch this through glass. I came down, and I stood at the end of the shelf with the ledger open in my hands and my pen out, because that was the only thing I knew how to do. She did not go to the number 1 position. She walked past it. She walked past the rifle on the sandbag and out to the edge of the shelf, to the right of the whole firing line, out past the last position, and she stood there in the open with her hands at her sides, and she looked at the range. And she stayed there. Nobody said anything for about 30 seconds, and then somebody in the formation made the permission sound again, the almost laugh, and this time nobody took it up, because there was something about the way she was standing that killed it. She stood there for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I wrote it down. I wrote 10:17, subject on the shelf, observing. And then I wrote 1028 subject still observing, because I did not know what else to write and I have a compulsion. 11 minutes, in front of 31 recruits and a master sergeant and a range officer, doing nothing at all that any of us could see. I understand it now, I did not then. She was not doing nothing. She was watching the shoulder of the northern hill, 4 kilometers out, where a road cut across it, and she was watching the dust. She was watching the dust come off that cut road, and she was watching where it went. And she was watching the grass on the far berm, and the flags. She looked at the flags maybe twice in 11 minutes, and both times she looked at them for less than a second, the way you check a clock you don't trust. And she was watching a hawk. There was a hawk working the bowl. There is always a hawk working that bowl. She watched it for a long time, watched it turn, watched where it stopped beating and where it had to start again. And when it slid sideways, she watched exactly how far sideways it slid and how fast it got there. And at some point she took out her own notebook and she wrote in it, standing up, without looking at the page. Then she came back to the line, and she went to the number 4 position, and she picked up the rifle. She did not shoulder it. She sat down behind it, cross-legged, and she put it across her knees and she looked at it. She checked the bolt and she pulled it and she looked at the chamber and she closed it. She looked at the scope. She turned the elevation turret through its full travel, all the way up and all the way back, counting. I could see her counting. Her lips did not move, but her chin moved a little, and she put it back where it started. She did the same with the windage. She put her thumb on the parallax ring and turned it and looked through and turned it back and left it slightly off from where Ballard had it. Then she opened the action and she took out the magazine and she pulled every round out of it and she looked at them. 10 rounds. She laid them on the sandbag in a row and she picked each one up and turned it and put it down, and she took 2 of them and set them aside, apart from the others, and she loaded the other 8 back and put the 2 rejects in her chest pocket. Ballard said, "What's wrong with those?" "Neck run out," she said without looking up. "Not by much." He did not have an answer to that. There is not an answer to that. Then she took the rear bag out from under the stock, looked at it, put it back down, and instead she took off her jacket, folded it 3 times and used it. She set the bipod feet with her hands, one at a time, pressing them into the grit and rocking them and pressing them again, and she moved the whole rifle 4 inches left and reset them, and then she moved it back too. She got behind it. And then, and this is the part the recruits still talk about, I am told, the ones who are still in, and I know because 2 of them have written to me over the years. She reached out and she picked up a handful of grit from the shelf and she let it fall. Not to check the wind at the line. She was watching where it landed. She did it 3 times, and each time she watched the grit hit the ground, and each time she moved her hand a little differently, and I did not understand, and Ballard did not understand, and the recruits did not understand, and nobody said one word. Then she went still. I have seen men go still on a firing line. Every one of them is still on the outside and busy on the inside. You can see it, the little corrections, the shifting, the breath they take because they told themselves to take a breath. She was still all the way through. She lay there for 2 minutes without moving anything but her right hand on the elevation turret. Twice. She came up on it and then, 90 seconds later, she came back down on it, reversed her own correction, which is a thing no shooter I have ever watched has done, because to reverse your own dope in front of an audience is to admit in public that you were wrong, and men do not do it. She did it, and she did not care that we saw. The flags at that moment were showing a full value left-to-right wind at the mid-range flag. That is the flag every man on that shelf was reading, because that is the flag you are taught to read. She was not looking at the flags. She was looking through the scope, at the shale about 600 yards downrange at the top of a low rise, where there was a scatter of scrub, and she was watching the scrub. Ballard said quietly to the range officer, and I heard it, I was 4 feet away, she's going to send it into the berm. And she fired. I had the spotting glass up. I had it on the plate. The plate at 1100 yards on Harrow Ridge is a steel rectangle, weathered white, hung on a frame, and when a round hits it, it moves and it rings, and the ring takes 3 seconds to come back across the bowl to you. The round hit it. Dead center, it moved, it rang. And the shelf did not make a sound because nobody believed it. I want to be precise. There was no cheer. There was no gasp. 31 recruits and a master sergeant and a range officer and a scorekeeper watched an 1100-yard plate ring, and every single one of us decided privately in our own heads in that half second that it was luck. She cycled the bolt. And she fired again. And it rang again. And that is when a thing began to happen on that shelf that I have never seen before or since. Third round rang. Fourth rang. She was not rushing. There were probably 40 seconds between each shot, and they were not the same 40 seconds. Some were longer. One was nearly 2 minutes, and during that one she came off 1/2 mil of windage, and I watched her do it, and I could not for the life of me tell you why. Fifth, sixth. Somebody in the formation said, out loud, "What?" Seventh. Ballard had come forward. He was standing about 8 feet behind her with his hands at his sides, and he was not saying anything at all. Eighth, 8 rounds, 8 hits. She opened the action, and the bolt came back on an empty magazine, and she reached into her chest pocket and took out the 2 rounds she had rejected, the 2 with the runout, and she looked at them, and she loaded one. And she said, without turning around, in a completely ordinary voice, "Master Sergeant, your rifle's throwing about a 1/4 minute right at the top of the bolt's travel. Somebody's been closing it hard. It's opened up the lug seat." Ballard said nothing. She said, "It's not your shooting." And she fired the 9th round, and it rang. The plate came down that afternoon, and Prout had it brought up to the tower, and it sat on the table in the tower for a long time, and men came and looked at it. 9 rounds. There was a hole through it about the size of my 2 thumbs put together, ragged at the edges, and around it the white weathered paint was untouched. 9 rounds at 1100 yards, at 10:41 in the morning, in the sheer, on a range that had closed at 10 for 4 years, through a hole. I want to tell you the recruits cheered. They did not. There was a silence on that shelf that went on so long that it stopped being a silence and started being a physical object. And then Private Deo, the smallest man in the formation, the one who had been told to ask her rank, Private Deo said, into it, in a completely wrecked voice, "Ma'am, what is your rank?" And it was the same question, the exact same words, word for word from the same mouth 4 hours later. And she still did not answer it. She got up off the line. She dusted her front. She picked up the 8 empty cases and the 1 empty case, and she put them in her pocket, not in the bucket, and she picked up her jacket and shook the grit out of it, and she said to Ballard, "It's a good rifle. Have somebody look at the lug seat." And she started walking back toward the shed. Lieutenant Commander Prout went up to the tower and got on the terminal, and I know exactly why he did it, and he has never denied it, and I respect him for that. He did not do it to honor her, he did it to remove her. He had a civilian, that is what she was in his head, a civilian who had refused a lawful instruction to clear a firing line in front of 31 recruits, and had then commandeered a service weapon and fired 9 rounds on his range. That is a report. That is a very bad report with his name on the bottom of it. And so he went up to the tower to pull whatever base access record she had, get her name and her sponsor and her badge number, and start the paperwork that would get her off Harrow Ridge and make it somebody else's problem. The tower has a screen. It is mounted high on the wall so the range staff can all see the same thing at once. It is a stupid design. Nobody ever thought about it. It has been up there since before my time. Prout sat down and he typed, and then he stopped typing. I was on the tower steps. Ballard was in the doorway. The screen was up on the wall where the whole room could see it, and where, because the tower faces the shelf and the door was open, and the shelf sits below, half the formation could see it too if they craned. They craned. The record came up. It came up, and the top third of it was a photograph, and the photograph was her, 10 or 12 years younger, in service dress, and the collar of that service dress had things on it, and there was a rack of ribbons under it about 4 rows deep. And under the photograph, on a screen 1.5 meters wide, in a room with a master sergeant in the doorway and a scorekeeper on the steps. CADAU, VSNAA Commander USN. And below it, and Prout scrolled, and I do not think he meant to scroll, I think his hand simply moved. Call sign, Sabbath. And below that, a service record that went on, and would not stop going on, and about half of it was blacked out, and the half that was not blacked out was worse than the half that was. Small boat command, riverine, 2 commands, and then a long stretch that was black, and then a course listing, and the course listing was intelligence and interrogation, and then more black. And then, near the bottom, in a section headed with a word I had never seen on a personnel record before, one plain unclassified line that was not blacked out at all, and it said, Range record, Harrow Ridge, 1200 YDS, holder 11 YRS. She held the range record. She held the range record on our range. She had held it for 11 years. It was not on our board. Our board had Ballard's 900 yards on it because 4 years ago somebody had made a new board and had copied over the last few entries and had not gone back further than that. And that is the entire reason, and it is not a mystery, and there is no conspiracy in it. It is just a man with a marker who did not check. And there was one more line, and Prout read it out loud, because I think he had stopped being able to not read things out loud. Trained by SARN ACW04 Harrow Ridge. She had been SARN student. She had come back to the ridge where her instructor died, and she had swept the floor of his shed and fixed his scopes and read his notebook, and let a room full of men laugh at her. Ballard went down the tower steps. He went down them fast, and he went across the shelf, and the recruits got out of his way, and he went to the shed door, and she was inside at the bench, and she had her jacket on, and the green notebook was in her hand, and she was, I saw this through the window, she was putting it back in the footlocker. And Ballard stopped in the doorway, and he said, "Ma'am." And she straightened up and turned around. He was not a young man, and he did not do it gracefully, and I do not think he had planned any of it. He came to attention, in a shed, in front of a footlocker full of faded flags, and he saluted her. And she looked at him for a moment, and then she returned it, and she returned it the way you return a salute you have returned 10,000 times, and she dropped her hand, and Ballard's arm came down, and neither of them said a word. And then he said, and his voice went, right in the middle of it, and every man on that shelf heard it go, "Ma'am, I put a boy up to asking your rank." And she said, "I know. I need to say it in front of them." "No, you don't," she said. "You need to teach them the wind." And she picked up her bag. She left the ridge that afternoon. I do not know where she went. Her billet was 6 weeks of temporary duty in the range maintenance line, and it ended on a Friday, and she went. And there was no ceremony, and nobody made a speech, and she did not want one. She left 3 things. She left the plate, with the hole in it, which is in the tower now, on the wall, and there is no plaque under it, and there does not need to be. She left the range record on the board, because Prout went up there that same afternoon with a rag and a marker, and wiped Ballard's 900 off it and wrote 1,200 IDs, CDRVCADE, Sabbath, and under it 1,100 IDs, 9 RDS, one whole same, and Ballard stood there and watched him do it and did not say one word. And she left a notebook, not Sarn's, hers, the plain new one. She left it on the bench in the shed, closed, with a pencil on top of it, and inside it was everything. The sketch of the valley, the shoulder, the road cut, the dust, the hawk, the 3 layers, the sheer, the rolling column at 1,100 yards, the times of day it forms and the times it dies, in a clean hand, with the dead man's observations copied in and corrected where he had them wrong and credited where he had them right. On the first page at the top, she had written one line. It said, "The flags lie after 9:30. Watch the dust on the shoulder." A. Sarn, and he was correct. That book is the basis of every wind card issued on Harrow Ridge today. It is in the marksmanship packet. It has her name on it. Recruits who were not born when she stood on that shelf have her name in their hands. I kept the ledger for 4 more years, and then I got out. I have it here. It is on the shelf above where I am writing this. It is green and it is water-stained, and it has 9 years of columns in it in my exact black hand. Every round fired on that range, every score, every miss, every wind call, every name. Every name but hers for 6 weeks. I did not write her down. I wrote Civ, Cleaner. I wrote Subject. I wrote 714, Cleaner checks the wind, and I laughed at my own joke and turned the page, and she was standing in a doorway reading a valley that had beaten every man who ever came to it, and I logged her as a woman with a broom. I was the scorekeeper. That was my whole rank and my whole job, and I was good at it. And a woman spent 6 weeks in front of me, and I never once wrote down what I was looking at. I have not copied the ledger clean. I never will. But I went back to the last page of that 14th day, that night in the shed, alone, with the plate on the table and the shed door open, and the flags gone limp on the poles in the dark, and I found the line where I had written 813. MSGTB instructs Relay 2 to hand brass to Civ. Cleaner, and I crossed it out. And under it I wrote what I should have written the first morning, in a hand that was shaking so badly I had to write it twice. Commander Vesna Kadow, United States Navy. Call sign Sabbath, 1100 yards, 9 rounds, 1 hole. She was standing right there. We handed her our brass.